In the midst of the battle between the two strongest within Jujutsu Kaisen, a war broke out between Gojo Glazers and Sukuna Suckers. Allegedly, Sukuna was using Maharaga as a crutch, and because he was getting smoked by Gojo despite having help, including at one point turning the battle into a 3v1, even though Sukuna actually won the battle, people still often refer to him as a fraud for using Maharaga. Which fine, to each their own, I guess. But this take is actually incredibly hypocritical and lazy. I know that a lot of people who are calling Sukuna a fraud is just for the memes, but there are just as much people who genuinely believe that he is a fraud. So I do want to go in depth on why Sukuna is the opposite of a fraud, and why this battle actually made him far more impressive than we ever could have possibly thought. First, I want to point out that calling Sukuna a fraud is not fair to Gojo, because then he's also a fraud for not defeating a fraud and actually struggling with a fraud for a big chunk of the fight. He had many chapters and opportunities of beating Sukuna long before he pulled out Maharaga. Sure, Gojo probably had the W in the middle of the fight right before Maharaga, but Gojo had ample opportunity prior to this. So if Sukuna is a fraud, so is Gojo, which obviously neither of them are. But fandoms are going to fandom. And I'm talking to you as well, Sukuna fans. Do not call Gojo a fraud either, because if Gojo's a fraud, then so is Sukuna. Now, what really made Sukuna a fraud in the eyes of many JJK fans? Well, it's because he did not defeat Gojo on his own. He needed Megumi's 10 Shadows to use Maharaga to save him, adapt to him, and then ultimately land the final blow. But wait a minute. That doesn't really make sense when you actually think about it. 10 Shadows is Sukuna's ability. Now, did it used to be Megumi's? Well, duh, but it's not his anymore. It's not like Sukuna had Megumi fight alongside him. Sukuna rightfully took 10 Shadows on his own merits. See, Sukuna is such a goat at using cursed energy that he actually learned from Kenjaku something very impressive. When Kenjaku made Sukuna a cursed object to be passed down through the ages, Sukuna learned from this. After both witnessing and experiencing Kenjaku do this a single time, the King of Curses was now able to do this for himself. And this is what he did. This was all a part of his plan. He set in chain, took over Yuji's body, and then forcefully incarnated himself inside of Megumi. Not only that, but he then had to face an awakened Maki and an enraged Yuji while Megumi was issuing a 90% nerf to him from the inside. He then escaped, mastered his 10 Shadows in a single battle with Yoruzu, and then would eventually get to his 20-finger equivalent level of power after eating 4 fingers and a mummy. But one thing to add on to this is that when Gojo was unsealed, he went to land a kill shot on Kenjaku, but Sukuna, while still only at 15-finger power, was able to not only have the speed to intercept the attack from Gojo, but strong enough to counter it. Now, Gojo would actually get stronger than this after the time skip, but it's actually crazy how Sukuna just completely took this attack from Gojo, and it wasn't even made out to be a huge effort for him to do so, and that was with only 15-finger power. But anyways, back to Sukuna's ability of 10 Shadows. A lot of people forget that 10 Shadows isn't this ability that can be used all willy-nilly. No, in order to use the Shikigami, you must tame them. This is made a major point in the Shibuya arc when Megumi would unleash Maharaga. Because Sukuna could use Maharaga against Gojo, that would mean that he must have actually put in the work to tame him as well. Otherwise, Maharaga would have attacked him too. We actually see Sukuna do some incredibly crazy things in the fight with 10 Shadows, like merging multiple Shikigami to create the merged Agito, which sure, Gojo made look like a toy compared to Maharaga, but still, merged Beast Agito would be such a high tier fighter in the verse if he were just out there on his own. It does go to show that Sukuna is not displaying fraudulent behavior because of the things he can do with his own ability. It would be a lot more fraud-like if he, for example, had poor usage of the 10 Shadow curse technique, or let's say he was born with an ability to steal curse techniques, kind of like similar to, I guess, All for One from My Hero Academia. But nope, he can just learn how to take on brand new curse techniques and make it work like a charm for him after just a little bit of practice. But here's the thing I do want to address. For the first 7 chapters of the Gojo vs Sukuna fight, Sukuna did not use 10 Shadows offensively or defensively against Gojo, as the fight started at the end of chapter 223, and he did not use 10 Shadows until the end of chapter 229, after Gojo had trapped him in the Unlimited Void. Keep in mind that the overall fight ends before chapter 236, meaning that this fight is only 13 chapters long, showing that 10 Shadows wasn't even used for the majority of the fight. Sure, he was using it in the shadows prior to this, but he wasn't using it actively to fight, if you get what I mean. Before that, in chapters 223 through 229, the fight was basically a tie, with maybe a slight edge to Gojo. They kept doing domain clashes and they each took a W in that domain clash, and there was a whole bevy of domain clash ties as well. What originally did Sukuna in was the final domain clash in which Gojo got his domain off less than 0.01 seconds before Sukuna. We would see after this that Gojo had lost the ability to use domain expansions, meaning that it was a mere 0.01 seconds that prevented a tie, and a fraction of a second more than what prevented a Sukuna W. Again, Gojo had the advantage in the first half of the fight, but let's not act like it was not incredibly close. Let's also not forget that Gojo had to discover an entirely new application of reverse curse technique to do this, as he was able to target the recovery of his curse technique rather than the cuts in his body so that he could continue with the domain activations. Now, in the second half of the fight, in chapters 230 through 235, Gojo did pretty clearly have the upper hand. It wasn't a slaughter though, but you can tell that Gojo was winning that fight. But it was these chapters that gave much of the fandom the opinion that Sukuna was a fraud, and that Gojo would dogwalk Hiei and Sukuna. But we get a lot more context on this at the end of the fight. But let's go back to the 10 Shadows. It is these chapters where Sukuna does lean on 10 Shadows, as he visibly has the wheel ready for adaptation, and then he later has Maharaga and merge Agito fight Gojo in a 3v1. Gojo would bully Agito, but Gojo versus Maharaga was a different story. He didn't think he could defeat Maharaga in a single blow. Maharaga was a lot more of a problem for him than Agito, as he would need to resort to an unlimited hollow purple to take a winning position, as he erased Maharaga and severely wounded Sukuna. It was at the end of this chapter where everyone thought that Gojo had the battle won, but then we would learn that this was not the case. Gojo was unfortunately off-screened and defeated. He's dead, bisected, Darth Mauled without the endless fall. For Maharaga had adapted to infinity, and while Sukuna himself could not adapt to infinity like the Divine General, he was able to use him as a blueprint. See, this is where a lot of the JJK fandom is either confused or just plain wrong on how Sukuna actually won. They assumed that Maharaga's slash had a delayed effect on Gojo, or that he came back from erasure and landed a new slash, but that is certainly not the case. Sukuna even tells us how this went down. Here's what the King of Curses says in chapter 236. The first time that Maharaga adapted to your inviolability, it transmuted its own cursed energy in order to neutralize and nullify your inviolability. That was something that I could not do, so I waited. I waited until I could obtain an adaptation that would match your inviolability. The second adaptation proceeded as I had hoped. That wasn't meant to be a slash like the ones I launched. That was the extension of curse technique targets. Its target was not Satoru Gojo. It extended all the way to space, existence, and the world themselves, so as to cut them. Maharaga did not kill Gojo. What Maharaga did was show Sukuna how to win, and that he did. Sukuna targeted the very space that Gojo resided in and destroyed it, thus extinguishing the Honored One. Remember what the claim is. Sukuna needed to use someone else's ability to defeat Gojo and use them as a crutch. That's such a gross oversimplification of what actually happened, and when recontextualized, it shows how impressive Sukuna really is. Sukuna learned cursed object manipulation after experiencing it once with Kenjaku's work. Then he devised a whole ass plan to do this on Megumi, fights off a Toji level threat while being nerfed to less than 10% of his power. He tames the untamable Shikigami Maharaga, then uses the technique sparingly throughout the majority of the fight and doesn't even use it to land the winning blow. Instead, he again learns from the curse technique and Maharaga so that he can actually defeat Gojo himself. When the truth is told about Sukuna's victory and Gojo's defeat, the fraud allegations can easily be tossed aside as fandom wars drivel and a whole load of funny memes. Now, if you're still watching, you definitely liked the video, so please do leave a like and then comment and subscribe. Also, you can follow me on Twitter, and you can join my Discord, both are linked below in the description. Let's get back to it. What I also find incredibly funny is that in the Gojo versus Sukuna fight, Gojo is the one who literally had outside help. He started the fight with a 200% hollow purple that was being amped by Urahime. Yes, Gojo literally starts the fight with help, and this did damage to Sukuna by destroying one of his hands, though he ultimately recovered with RCT. While Gojo fans say this didn't affect the fight, that's not really the point, is it? And that might not even be true anyways. Sukuna did have to expend cursed energy when he multiplied it into positive energy to use RCT. You can argue that it would be so small that it would not make a difference, but can you prove that? In a fight this utterly close in the first half, who's to say that it automatically would not make a difference? We are talking about the first half of the fight that was decided by less than a hundredth of a second. What if this little drop of curse energy makes it a tie again, or gives Sukuna the 0.01 second advantage in the domain clash? I'm not saying that it 100% gave the advantage, or that even it would likely give him an advantage, but if it was the reverse, and Sukuna had done this, taking help from his allies to amp his cleave, to start the fight on Gojo from afar, you know that he would be targeted with allegations even though Gojo actually did it. The greatest part about this conversation is that Gojo would absolutely disagree with any of his fans that think Sukuna is a fraud. At the end of the fight, when Gojo was in that purgatory state, he thinks back to his fight with Sukuna, and he has not one, but two separate statements that Sukuna was not going 100%, meaning that he was literally holding back the entire time. Furthermore, Gojo even says that he wasn't even sure if he could have defeated Sukuna, even if Sukuna did not possess the 10 Shadows technique. This really was the death blow for the Fraud Kuna allegations, but the nail in the coffin was the fight against Kashimo. In that fight, Sukuna would use the item from Yorozu to incarnate into his Heian form. The messed up face, the forearms, etc. The manga implies he has higher physical strength in this form, and it also recovered his body. It may have even allowed him to use his domain once again, meaning that if he had activated this in the middle of the fight with Gojo, he could possibly have restored himself, and thus he could have outright won by being able to activate his domain once again. Needless to say that in this form, he's not only stronger, but can cast techniques far faster with the extra arms and the mouth in his stomach. Imagine if Sukuna activated this at the end of chapter 230, where Gojo realizes that he cannot use his domain, and neither can Sukuna. If he activates it, especially if it does restore his domain, but we do not know just yet if it actually does that. Now, a lot of people debate this topic and argue that Sukuna was never holding back, or that it makes zero sense, but it seems like mostly cope to me. Gojo himself says it twice, and he has these 6 eyes, so he should be able to see if Sukuna is holding back. So he is a credible source. He then states that even if Sukuna did not have 10 shadows, he didn't know if he could win. Sukuna then does reveal he can get stronger after his fight with Kashimo. Now the question is, why? And the reason seems to be that Sukuna was holding back specifically because he wanted to actually find a way to bypass infinity and not just outright win. One of the reasons I think he might be doing this is that if Sukuna is planning to live a long time after this, well, eventually there will be another chosen one in the Gojo clan. Someone else will be lucky enough to be born with these 6 eyes and limitless at the same time. If this happens, it's not really a problem anymore because of this spatial slash. But sure, we don't have a 100% motive yet, but we don't need a motive. I'm sure it will be explained, but as of right now, there's more than enough evidence to show that Sukuna was holding back. And let's say that Sukuna and Gojo had a rematch right now. Yeah, Sukuna just wins. He already has a way to straight up bypass infinity with 0 drawbacks now. Spatial slash GG, and he can spam that shit. Look at this. Sukuna turned the entire field of play into a checkers board in the sky, with each line being a bisection of the fabric of reality itself. Sukuna wouldn't even need 10 shadows now, and that's a fact. Like, even if Gojo tried to make unlimited void, well, domains are spaces made by Jujutsu users, likely meaning that these checkerboard slashes would destroy unlimited void before it could even be activated, as these slashes would destroy the very space that Gojo is attempting to create with his domain expansion. Keep in mind that there is a possibility that Sukuna can use domain amplification paired with a curse technique. While there are a bunch of statements that domain amplification cannot be used with a curse technique, as that is its function, Sukuna did break this rule as he used both domain amplification and his curse technique at the same time in his fight with Gojo. And a narrator statement from years back also implies that it is possible to instill an amplification with a curse technique, though I have seen some contentions with that translation, so it might not be 100%. If Sukuna can actually instill his curse technique into his domain amplification, Gojo really is toast. That means he can swap between one with no curse technique and one with a curse technique, giving him multiple ways to not only bypass infinity, but also kill Gojo. In theory, Sukuna could land a punch on Gojo that would launch out a spatial slash at the same time, giving him a possible way to trick Gojo and land a winning blow. One of the wild things about Sukuna's spatial slashes is that it pretty much gives him the automatic advantage in a domain clash. Remember that what kept the domain clashes close is that Sukuna had to attack from the outside of the domain because that was the weak point. What this should mean is that Sukuna could actually destroy Unlimited Void from the inside as well, as domain expansions are just spaces made with curse energy. Furthermore, this would actually mean that Sukuna could pretty much instantly destroy the Unlimited Void by attacking the outer shell with his spatial slashes. If regular dismantles and cleaves damaged it, then the spatial slash would cut through it like butter. And remember, Sukuna is now physically stronger and casts faster, so his activation timing for domain expansion should now be significantly faster than Gojo's. My final note is that Gojo was actually lucky in this fight too. He got Black Flash and Sukuna did not. Now, Black Flash isn't purely luck-based, it's more like a half-court shot in basketball. It's something you can do and get better at and be more likely to make, but you are very rarely ever actually making one, especially in a game. Gojo was lucky enough to land one and then a few more successfully as well, but even with Black Flash, he could not one-shot Sukuna, despite the massive increase in power. And we do know that the Black Flash can amp the user up to 120% power after doing it. And it also did a lot to help Gojo in the aftermath by restoring him. If Gojo doesn't get the Black Flash, the entire end of the second half of the fight is flipped on its head. Imagine if it was flipped, and Sukuna was lucky enough to hit his half-court shot and activate a Black Flash. Better yet, imagine if the both of them did. I think that a bunch of Black Flash collisions between the two of them would have been great, and not having that felt like a missed opportunity because it would have been a great way to show the peak of Jujutsu sorcery in my opinion. But don't get me wrong on this point, Gojo's skill is a major reason for why he landed the multiple Black Flashes. I'm not saying it's 100% luck. But yeah, these are my opinions on why I think that Sukuna is not a fraud, and really the allegations were never that great. They were mainly funny memes, but the people who actually believed it didn't really analyze the series that much. But yeah, with the ending of the fight, with Sukuna being confirmed to be holding back, and then also Gojo even stating these things, it's kind of crazy that how bad the fraud allegations really were. But the memes are actually amazing though. But let me know your thoughts down below. Do you still think Sukuna's a fraud? Did you ever think he's a fraud? Let me know down below. Let me know if I missed anything as well, as JJK is actually a very in-depth verse. It's really easy to miss things. And also, if you want access to more Broku videos and early access to my videos, you can become a member of the channel. With that being said, hope you guys all have an amazing day. Peace out.